So when I was a teenager, the thing to say to others that didn't get something obvious, so when you said something obvious, you would say, duh. The sky is blue. Duh. But sometimes when someone says something obvious, it may actually not be obvious to us. What do you mean the sky is blue? For most of the year in the Pacific Northwest, the sky is gray. So let's start with what seemed like a duh moment for Jesus, but for the disciples was confusing. Turn to Mark 8. Mark 8. It turns out that Jesus might have implied duh when he was trying to explain and warn specifically about the leaven of the Pharisees and Herod. And hopefully, by the end of this message, we'll see how this leaven actually permeates our lives even today and how we can counteract it. Mark 8. Mark 8, and let's start in verse 13. Mark 8, verse 13. And he, Jesus, left them, talking about the Pharisees who he was just arguing with, and getting into the boat again, Jesus and the disciples departed to the other side. Verse 14, now the disciples had forgotten to take bread. Now what's funny is this is just after the miracle of feeding the 4,000. So they had plenty of bread, but they forgot to get any. And they did not have more than one loaf with them in the boat. Then he, Jesus, charged them saying, here it is, take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. And they, the disciples, kind of caught off guard here for what they kind of thought was like a semi-random thought, reasoned among themselves, saying, it must be because we don't have any bread. Verse 17, but Jesus, being aware of it, said to them, here it is, why do you reason because you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive nor understand? Is your heart still hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember? Duh. Now, Jesus seems frustrated and saying, duh, guys, why don't you get the obvious? But I have to admit, so far, I'm kind of in the dark with the disciples at this point. Mark 8, verse 19 now. Verse 19, Jesus continues using the following questions that to him clarifies the warning about this type of leaven of the Pharisees and Herod. Jesus says, when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of fragments did you take up? The disciples said to him, 12. And also, Jesus continues, when I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many large, full fragments did you take up? And the disciples said, 7. Verse 21, so Jesus said to them, how is it that you don't understand? Do you get it yet? That was Jesus' explanation. And to me, it's still not obvious. The Bible commentaries do not agree on the reasons for this interchange, which is super fascinating. But most connect this interchange with its recounting in Matthew, where it likens the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees with their doctrine or their teaching. Now, this might give us our first clue as to what this leaven is, because it has to be something shared among the Pharisees, Sadducees, and Herod. And that's not easy because, as you likely remember, the Pharisees and Sadducees' teachings were quite different. Pharisees were prided on their fasting twice a week and laying heavy burdens or extra laws on the people in their interpretation of the law, where the Sadducees didn't even believe in the spiritual realm. They didn't believe in angels, nor did they believe in the resurrection. So they tended to focus on the physical, gathering wealth and power. The leaven of the Sadducees and Herod are likely the same thing, because the Sadducees ran the temple, but held their position not through the line of Aaron, but through political and wealth means among the Roman rulers, like the Herod family. Herod spent over 40 years updating the temple area to be one of the wonders of the ancient world, seemingly for political inroads with the Jews that he ruled and Herod's own glory. What do we refer to that temple as? Herod's temple. So what is at least one aspect that could tie these groups together that Jesus is warning us about? So it's what I'm going to call man math, a reliance on our human reasoning and human emotions over the truth of God. Man math tells us there are certain things that are just too hard. Man math forgets God. So here's the point. Is anything too hard for the Lord? Is anything too hard for the Lord? And my title today, very simple, God math trumps man math every time. Our human reasoning and human emotions, or man math, are a powerful force permeating our lives like leaven. For the Pharisees, man math told them we must create a hedge around the law to protect the people so they never even get close to breaking the law. Very logical, with a bit of emotion to up the ante. For the Sadducees and Herod, the only way to truly ensure we do things right at the temple and run Jerusalem correctly is to rely on our cunning and our wealth to ensure that we have the right relationships and with powerful people. Man math focuses on logic and emotion and just accepting this is just how the world works. It's synonymous with the idolatry of facts and feelings. The trap of facts taking over is a reliance on cold, hard logic. There is no recovery for a forgotten slave in an Egyptian prison. Forget it. It ignores God math that could bypass logic and elevate Joseph to the second in all of Egypt. The trap of feelings taking over is believing something is too hard for the Lord. It's like Elijah being hunted by Jezebel and saying, I alone am left of all of Israel. God math is finding out that there were 7,000 that had not bowed their knee to that false god. Man math hijacks our brains. Joseph and Elijah are only the beginning of examples. Let's turn to Genesis 18. Genesis 18, and let's talk about Sarah. Genesis 18. Even Abraham's wife, Sarah, fell into letting logic and her feelings dictate her beliefs, and then to doubt God. Genesis 18 has the God of the Old Testament and two angels visiting Abraham in bodily form. And Abraham quickly tells his wife and servants to make unleavened bread and to kill and prepare a calf for these visitors. Now, some traditions say that this might have actually been during the spring holy days. So as the visitors are eating, with Abraham watching over, the visitors ask, where's Sarah? Abraham explains that Sarah is in the tent behind them. And then the Lord repeats the promise that he has made to Abraham years before so that Sarah could hear it for herself. Genesis 18, and let's look at verse 10. Genesis 18 and verse 10, and I'll be reading from the New Living Translation. Then one of them said, I will return to you about this time next year, and your wife, Sarah, will have a son. Sarah was listening to this conversation from the tent. Verse 11, Abraham and Sarah were both very old by this time, and Sarah was long past the age of having children. Now, this is an understatement. Sarah is 90 years old. Abraham is almost 100. The Guinness Book of World Records has a 68-year-old lady from Spain as the oldest woman to give birth to a child, at least in recent history. And that was only with the help of a fertility clinic. Sarah knew being able to have a child made zero logical sense. The next verse tells us how she responded to such a claim. Genesis 18, verse 12. She laughed silently to herself. I make this a little personal by imagining she gave that this is ridiculous look, that like, with the pursed lips, like that kind of thing. Unbelieving smirk, silent laugh. She silently laughed, probably shaking her head. Sarah laughed silently is something you might be familiar with. I would be lying if I sometimes don't have that same look on my face when the guy giving the sermonette on a holy day goes into the offertory. I sometimes roll my eyes when I hear Deuteronomy 16, verse 16 mentioned. Here we go again. How every household was not to appear before the Lord empty-handed, to give an offering 3 times a year in days of unleavened bread, in the Feast of Weeks and the Feast of Tabernacles. Then I kind of just shake my head, silently laughing, because we always talk about 3 times a year, making sure we say 3 seasons, because it's awkward since we know that we take up an offering 7 times a year on each of the 7 annual holy days. If you spent years in the Church of God, you know the drill. We'll hold up an offering envelope. Please raise your hand if you need one, and an usher will get you one, right? We know the drill. Logically and emotionally, we may have checked out, like Sarah, silently laughing. Oh, here we go again, with the church trying to get some money. I mean, what does a little offering by me, what does a little green envelope contribute in the great scheme of things? It's a question much like what Sarah thought. And yes, if you need an envelope, please raise your hand. Verse 12 here, was Sarah thinking this to herself? In the rest of verse 12, she said, how could a worn-out woman like me enjoy such pleasure, especially when my master, my husband, is also so old? Can you blame Sarah for having these feelings and laughing? Though Sarah did live in the time that people did live longer, she died at 127 years old to Abraham's 175. By her own statement, she confirms that women didn't have children that late. It was simply impossible. But impossible wasn't the only thing going on. The idolatry of facts and feelings so often include the fruit of resentment and bitterness. It was 25 years ago from this moment that Abraham told Sarah one night, you'll never guess what God told me today about all the stars and all the great, great, great grandkids that we're going to have. It was 25 years of Sarah hoping maybe this is the year. Sarah's silent laugh, hoping for a child, was a long time coming. Our own silent laugh might be a long time coming too, whether it's hurt from expectations not met, promises seemingly withheld, a church that's made of fallible humans that have hurt each other, the facts and feelings that hijack our brain, the man math that makes us into being doubtful, distrustful, and flippant are completely understood because we know how things work. Sarah likewise knew how things worked, letting facts and feelings hijack the truth that she heard from God's own lips. See, the thing is, those rules of how things work were created by a God that has permission to break them or use them in ways that we didn't even know could work. So any rule or fact or feeling that we know essentially can become a stumbling block if we forget what God told Sarah in the next couple of verses. And this is the key to the facts and feelings, the key to wrestling with our own man math. Genesis 18, verse 13. Then the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh? Why did she say, can an old woman like me have a baby? Verse 14. Is anything too hard for the Lord? Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return about this time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Verse 15, Sarah was afraid, so she denied it, saying, I didn't laugh. But the Lord said, no, you did laugh. The Jamieson Fawcett Brown commentary says this, for in the circumstance of her incredulous smile, she was following the dictates of her natural reason only, not the word of God, whose power she limited by the results of her own observation and experience. It was important that she be brought to believe everything he promised without reasoning concerning its apparent impossibility. from a full conviction of his ability to perform it because he, God, is God. End quote. In comparison to the truth of the Bible, any fact or feeling should always be secondary. It's like what Paul said to the Corinthians about our thoughts and feelings, of which I'll quote. I'm going to quote from 2 Corinthians 10, verse 3, if you'd like to make a note of it in your notes. 2 Corinthians 10, verse 3 says, "For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war after the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. And these strongholds are generally lodged right here in our brain." Verse 5, "Casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ." Whether it's 3 times a year that we give an offering, 7 times a year, or every single day of each of the feasts, as some Israelites gave their free will offerings, because they were just so stinking excited about being in the presence of their God. Please look at your heart as you give. God math doesn't need your money. God math wants your heart. And a giving heart is so happy to give. Jesus told the disciples to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Herod, who taught doctrines based in man math, and gave them the counterexample of some God math. 5 loaves somehow feeds 5,000. 7 loaves somehow feed 4,000, with different amounts left over. Facts and feelings, man math, can exalt themselves and make us forget bigger truth, like God is bigger than everything else, and that God operates in God math. Whatever you're facing, whatever rational thought or emotions threaten to take over your life, that you're too young, too old, too lost, too broken, too ruined, too overwhelmed, remember the key to dealing with the leaven of facts and feelings is the question posed to Abraham and Sarah. Is anything too hard for the Lord? God math trumps man math. I love you guys. Duh. As we collect the offering, we'll have offertory music performed by Miss Rachel K. Roos, who will be playing the Schindler's List theme by John Williams.